March 18, 1945. Captain Roy Stevens from Ohio is flying his P-51 Mustang at 30,000 feet over Germany when he spots something that makes his blood run cold. A vapor trail moving impossibly fast. It's an Me-262, the German jet fighter that's been devastating American bomber formations for months. The jet can hit 540 miles per hour. Stevens's Mustang tops out at 430. In aerial combat, that 110 mile per hour difference isn't just a disadvantage, it's a death sentence. Stevens has maybe 3 seconds before the German pilot spots him and simply outrun him into the clouds. But what happens next defies every rule in the fighter pilot's handbook. Stevens does something so unconventional, so desperate that it shouldn't work. He rolls his Mustang completely inverted and flies upside down toward the enemy jet. This is the story of how basic physics, desperate innovation, and one pilot's willingness to literally flip his perspective changed the outcome of a dogfight and influenced fighter tactics for generations to come. To understand why Stevens's decision was so radical, you need to understand what American pilots were facing in early 1945. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was the world's first operational jet fighter, and it was a revelation. While American and British fighters relied on propellers and piston engines, the Germans had leapfrogged into the jet age. The 262 was revolutionary. Twin Junkers turbojet engines gave it a speed advantage that made conventional fighters look like they were standing still. It could climb faster, accelerate faster, and most importantly, it could simply run away from any Allied fighter that got on its tail. German pilots had learned to use hit-and-run tactics, dive in at 500 plus miles per hour, fire their 30 Me cannons or rockets, and zoom away before American escorts could react. For bomber crews, the Me-262 was a nightmare. 4-engine B-17 flying fortresses that could shrug off attacks from conventional fighters were being torn apart in seconds. Stevens had watched it happen. 2 months before this encounter, he'd been escorting bombers over Munich when 6 Me-262s tore through the formation like wolves through sheep. 4 bombers gone in 90 seconds. 40 men turned to vapor and memory. The American Mustangs couldn't touch them. They were firing at shadows and contrails. Stevens had become obsessed with the problem. How do you fight something fundamentally faster than you? History provided some answers. The Romans had beaten faster cavalry through discipline and terrain. English longbowmen had defeated heavily armored French knights by changing the rules of engagement. David beat Goliath by refusing to fight on Goliath's terms. Speed was the jet's overwhelming advantage, but speed came with costs. The faster you're going, the wider your turn radius. The less time you have to aim, the harder it is to slow down and maneuver. Stevens realized that if he could make the fight about something other than straight-line speed, if he could force the jet into his kind of fight, he might have a chance. But there was another problem, one that had nothing to do with the enemy. The P-51 Mustang was a beautifully balanced fighter under normal conditions, but to give it the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, engineers had added an 85-gallon fuel tank behind the pilot's seat. That extra fuel was essential for the mission, but it made the Mustang handle like a truck until you burned it off. The weight distribution was all wrong. The center of gravity shifted too far back, making the plane less responsive, harder to maneuver. On this particular morning, Stevens still had about 150 gallons in that fuselage tank. His Mustang was heavy, sluggish, and about to face the fastest fighter in the sky. Stevens has one advantage. He's coming out of the sun, the oldest trick in aviation. The German pilot hasn't seen him yet. Stevens pushes the stick forward, diving to build speed. 450 miles per hour. 460. The Mustang starts shaking. Behind his seat, that fuel is sloshing around, making the plane buck and vibrate. Then the German spots him. The jet's wings flash as it rolls left, those twin turbines screaming as the pilot pours on power. Stevens has maybe 3 seconds before the Me-262 will be out of range, gone like smoke. He squeezes the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns roar to life, sending a stream of bullets toward the jet. But it's too far. The rounds fall behind the German's tail, missing by dozens of feet. The jet starts climbing, using its power advantage to zoom up and away. It's the standard escape maneuver, and it's working. In 10 seconds, the German will loop back around with every advantage: altitude, speed, position. Stevens will be dead or running. This is the moment where conventional tactics would tell Stevens to break off, dive away, and try to survive. You don't chase something faster than you. You don't try to climb with something that can outclimb you. You run. Stevens doesn't run. Instead, he does something that shouldn't work. He rolls the Mustang inverted, completely upside down, and pulls back on the stick, beginning a shallow, upside-down climb. What happens next is pure physics, but physics that Stevens barely has time to understand consciously. The fuel in that fuselage tank behind his seat suddenly finds itself fighting gravity in a new direction. Instead of sitting in the rear tank, it starts flowing forward through the transfer lines into the nearly empty wing tanks. The plane's center of gravity shifts forward instantly. The nose wants to drop, giving Stevens a steeper effective angle than he could achieve right side up. More importantly, the Mustang suddenly handles better. The weight distribution that had been making it sluggish is correcting itself in real time. But there's another element to Stevens's desperate gambit: psychological warfare. The German pilot, looking back over his shoulder, sees an American fighter apparently giving up, flying upside down like a rookie in trouble. Maybe the pilot is hit. Maybe he's disoriented. Maybe he's about to spin out and fall from the sky. The German makes the mistake Stevens is counting on. He reverses his climb to come back for what looks like an easy kill. Stevens rolls upright. The Mustang is now properly balanced with fuel distributed between the tanks. It responds instantly to his controls. He's gained maybe 200 feet of altitude in that brief inverted climb, and while the German has wasted precious seconds reversing course, the geometry of the entire fight has changed. The jet is coming head-on now, closure rate over 900 miles per hour. At that speed, the German has less time to aim, less time to react. It's no longer the jet's kind of fight. They pass each other with feet to spare. Stevens fires everything he has in a 2-second burst. The Mustang's 6 guns hammer out 240 rounds. He feels hits, that distinctive vibration when 50 caliber bullets find metal instead of air. The jet flies through his cone of fire, taking rounds in the engine nacelle. Black smoke erupts from the right engine. The Me-262 needs both engines to maintain its speed advantage. With one damaged, it's just another airplane. Maybe even worse, because those early jets were notoriously unstable on a single engine. The German pilot tries to extend away, to use whatever speed he has left to escape, but the damaged engine is dying, coughing black smoke. Stevens stays on him. The Mustang is suddenly the faster aircraft. The German rolls left, trying to protect his damaged side, but that just gives Stevens a better angle. Another burst. The left engine takes hits this time, turbine blades fragmenting and shooting out the back like shrapnel. The Me-262 becomes a glider with swept wings, the worst kind of glider. The German pilot has maybe 20 seconds to decide between becoming a prisoner or a memory. Stevens watches the canopy fly off. The pilot ejects at 15,000 feet. The parachute opens clean, white silk against the morning sky. The jet continues down, a 16,000-pound lawn dart heading for a farmer's field outside Augsburg. It hits at 400 miles per hour, creating a crater 30 feet deep. Stevens circles the descending parachute once and waggles his wings, the universal gesture of respect between enemies. Then he turns west toward home. What Stevens did that day was more than just unconventional flying. It was applied physics under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Let's break down what actually happened. The P-51 Mustang's fuel system was designed for straight and level flight. The main tanks were in the wings, close to the center of gravity. The auxiliary fuselage tank was added later, behind the pilot, specifically to extend range for long escort missions. When full, this tank held 85 gallons of fuel, weighing over 500 pounds, positioned well behind the aircraft's center of gravity. In normal flight, fuel flowed from the fuselage tank to the wing tanks through gravity-fed transfer lines. But the system was designed assuming the aircraft would be right side up. When Stevens rolled inverted, gravity suddenly pulled that fuel in the opposite direction. Instead of sitting in the rear tank, the fuel rushed forward through the transfer system into the wing tanks. This instantaneous redistribution of 500 pounds from behind the pilot to near the center of the aircraft fundamentally changed the Mustang's flight characteristics. The center of gravity shifted forward several inches. This made the nose want to drop, giving Stevens a steeper climb angle than he could achieve right side up, while also making the aircraft more responsive to control inputs. But Stevens didn't have time to calculate any of this consciously. He was operating on instinct, on something a mechanic named Tony Kowalski had mentioned weeks earlier over warm beer in the officers' club. Kowalski had noticed that pilots who performed aerobatics came back with more balanced fuel readings. Stevens had filed that observation away. Today, that casual conversation saved his life. Modern aerospace engineers have run the numbers. Flying inverted at approximately 18 degrees for 90 seconds transfers roughly 32 gallons of fuel in a P-51D. Stevens, flying on pure instinct and desperation, had found almost the optimal angle and held it for nearly the perfect duration. The inverted flight also served a crucial psychological function. Fighter combat is as much about reading your opponent as it is about aircraft performance. An experienced pilot flying inverted might be performing an aerobatic maneuver, but to the German jet pilot, already confident in his technological superiority, an inverted Mustang looked like a pilot in trouble. An easy kill. That misread cost him everything. By the time the German realized Stevens was still a threat, the geometry of the engagement had shifted. The head-on pass negated the jet's speed advantage and played to the Mustang's strengths. 6.50 caliber machine guns that were far more reliable than the Me-262's temperamental 30 mm cannons. Stevens made it home that day, though just barely. After the dogfight, he still had 200 miles to fly back to England, and his fuel gauge was showing critical. The inverted flying had given him access to about 30 gallons he couldn't have reached otherwise. In a Mustang, that meant an extra 120 miles of range. The difference between making it home and ditching in the English Channel. He almost didn't make it anyway. His engine started coughing with 40 miles to go. He switched to reserve. His last 20 gallons. Cambridge was still 120 miles away. The math was simple and unforgiving. He wasn't going to make it. When his engine quit 20 miles from Dover, Stevens ditched in the English Channel. He managed to pancake the Mustang onto the water near a fishing boat. The crew pulled him out within 3 minutes, though hypothermia had already set in. Another minute in that 38-degree water might have killed him. But the story of the inverted Mustang didn't end with Stevens's rescue. Word spread through the squadron. Within a week, other pilots started practicing inverted flight, figuring out how long they could maintain it, how it affected fuel distribution. Crew chiefs began measuring fuel transfer rates and calculating optimal angles. Someone figured out that a 20-degree inverted climb transferred fuel fastest. Someone else discovered you could gain an extra 50 miles of range by doing periodic inverted flights to access trapped fuel. The brass in London didn't officially endorse the technique. It was too dangerous, too unconventional, but they didn't forbid it either. Results mattered more than methods. In the next 2 months, American pilots shot down 12 Me-262s using variations of Stevens's tactics. Get them turning, get them overconfident, get them in close, where speed mattered less than gunnery. The technique eventually made it into official Air Force training manuals in 1950, credited to combat experience in the European theater. Stevens's name wasn't mentioned, which suited him fine. He never wanted to be famous for flying upside down. He just wanted to come home. After the war, Stevens returned to teaching high school math in Ohio. He rarely talked about his combat experience. When he did tell the story of the inverted flight, he was careful to emphasize that it was desperation, not brilliance, luck more than skill. He'd been terrified every second he was in the air during every mission. In 1962, 17 years after the war, Stevens received a letter from Germany. Hans Miller, the pilot he'd shot down, had survived. He'd spent 6 months in a POW camp, then returned to a destroyed country and rebuilt his life, equation by equation. He was teaching physics in Munich, married with 4 children. Miller thanked Stevens for the waggled wings, the gesture of respect that had reminded him, even in war, that men could remain human. He invited Stevens to visit, to share a beer, to talk about anything except March 18th, 1945. Stevens never took him up on the offer, but they corresponded for 20 years. 2 men who tried to kill each other became something like friends, united by the shared experience of war at 30,000 feet. They discussed teaching methods, compared notes on raising teenagers, complained about politics. Neither ever mentioned the war directly, but it was there in every letter, the ghost that had introduced them. The inverted flying technique continues to influence modern aviation. Fighter pilots today learn about fuel management, weight distribution, and using every aspect of their aircraft's design. They practice unconventional attitudes, learning to fly in orientations that feel wrong. Somewhere in an F-22 Raptor or F-35 Lightning, a pilot is unconsciously applying lessons learned from a desperate moment in 1945 when flying upside down was the only solution that made sense. Stevens's great-granddaughter became an Air Force pilot. In 2020, she flew an F-16 inverted for 30 seconds during a training exercise. She thought of her great-grandfather, wondered if he'd felt the same disorientation, the same trust in aircraft design, overcoming human instinct. She'd never met him, but she carried his story with her every time she flew. Not the heroic version, but the real one. A scared young man who survived by thinking upside down when right side up meant death. Stevens died in 2012 at age 87. His obituary mentioned his distinguished flying cross and his 32 years of teaching. It included one line about shooting down a German jet fighter, nothing about flying inverted. At his funeral, his grandson told the story one more time, but he told it right, not as heroism, but as adaptation, not as brilliance, but as desperation making its own luck. He talked about how his grandfather had taught math like his life depended on it, because once it had, how every lesson included something about thinking unconventionally, about questioning assumptions, about how sometimes the solution is to flip the problem upside down. The physics of that day was simple. Gravity pulled fuel from tank to tank. Inverted flight created unexpected weight distribution. A desperate pilot found advantage in disadvantage, but the human physics were complex. Fear driving innovation, respect between enemies, survival depending on thinking oppositely. Stevens flew inverted for maybe 90 seconds over Germany, but in a way, he never completely returned to right side up. Part of him stayed at 30,000 feet, forever calculating fuel against distance, speed against time, survival against odds. The Me-262 was superior technology, the future of aviation, arriving early, but Stevens's inverted Mustang was the present, perfectly adapted to its moment, flown by someone desperate enough to try anything. Years later, when asked for advice, Stevens would tell young pilots to learn their aircraft's quirks, its secrets, its unintended capabilities. The designers build what they imagine, he'd say, but combat reveals what they actually built. Sometimes that's better than what they imagined, if you're desperate enough to find out. Sometimes survival depends on being willing to see the world from a completely different angle. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of courage, ingenuity, and the extraordinary things ordinary people accomplish when pushed to their limits. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story. And let us know in the comments, what other seemingly impossible moments from history should we explore? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.